The locked room. It was the last day of school, and the air was electric with the anticipation of summer break. My friends and I, Emma, Jason, and Mia, had heard whispers about the old, locked classroom at the end of the East Wing. The room had been abandoned for decades, sealed off after a student, Henry Matthews, died under mysterious circumstances. Some said it was haunted, but we saw it as the perfect adventure to cap off the school year. "Are you sure about this?" Mia asked, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and fear as we stood in front of the door. "Come on, Mia," Jason said, flashing his usual confident grin. "It's just an old classroom. What's the worst that could happen?" Emma picked the lock with surprising ease, and the door creaked open, revealing a room frozen in time. Desks were covered in dust, and cobwebs draped from the ceiling like macabre decorations. A chill ran down my spine as we stepped inside, the air heavy with a sense of unease. "Look at this," Emma said, pointing to a blackboard with faint writing still visible. Henry was here. The date scrawled below. It was the day he died. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us. We all jumped, and Mia let out a small scream. Jason ran to the door and pulled on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "We're trapped," he shouted, pounding on the door. The room grew colder, and a faint whisper filled the air, growing louder until it became a distinct voice. "Help me." "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Yeah," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "Henry, is that you?" A shadowy figure began to materialize in the corner of the room, and we watched in horrified fascination as it took the form of a teenage boy, his face pale and eyes hollow. "I need your help," the ghost said, his voice echoing around us. "What happened to you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The ghost's eyes locked onto mine, and suddenly, we were no longer in the abandoned classroom. We were transported back in time, witnessing the events of that fateful day. Henry was being bullied by a group of older boys, their taunts and jeers echoing in the hallways. They chased him into the very classroom we now stood in, locking the door behind them. Henry's fear was palpable as the bullies cornered him. One of them shoved him hard, causing him to fall and hit his head on the corner of a desk. Blood poured around him, and the boys panicked, fleeing the scene and leaving him to die alone. We were thrust back into the present, the ghostly Henry now standing before us, his eyes filled with sorrow. "They never found out what happened," he said. "I've been trapped here, reliving that moment over and over." "We need to let people know the truth," Emma said, her voice firm with determination. "How?" Jason asked, glancing around the room. "There's a journal," Henry said, pointing to an old, dusty book on the teacher's desk. "It has everything written down. I wrote about the bullying, the threats, everything." We found the journal and read through it, the pages filled with Henry's desperate pleas for help that had gone unanswered. Armed with this evidence, we knew what we had to do. "Thank you," Henry said, his form growing fainter. "Please, make sure they know." With a sudden rush of wind, the door flew open. We stumbled out, clutching the journal tightly. The once eerie and oppressive atmosphere of the room seemed to lift as we left, as if Henry's spirit had finally found some peace. Back in the main part of the school, we went straight to the principal's office and handed over the journal. An investigation was launched, and the truth about Henry's death finally came to light. The bullies, now adults, were held accountable, and the story of Henry Matthews was no longer a whispered rumor, but a cautionary tale known by all. As summer began, we felt a sense of closure, knowing we had helped a lost soul find peace. The old classroom was eventually renovated and reopened, a plaque dedicated to Henry's memory placed inside. We had faced the unknown and emerged not just as survivors, but as champions of justice for a boy who had been forgotten for too long. As the summer days rolled on, the story of Henry Matthews reverberated through the town. The once forgotten tragedy became a topic of solemn discussions and reflections. Henry's story was now part of the school's history curriculum, serving as a poignant reminder of the consequences of unchecked bullying and the importance of compassion. Emma, Jason, Mia, and I felt an unexpected bond deepen between us after that fateful day. We spent more time together, often discussing our surreal encounter and the chilling details of Henry's story. It was as if we were the keepers of a fragile, powerful secret that had finally been shared with the world. One evening, as the sun set and cast long shadows over the town, we decided to visit the school again. We wanted to see the classroom after its renovation. The atmosphere was entirely different now. It was no longer a place of fear, but one of remembrance and respect. The door to the classroom was open, and inside, the desks had been arranged neatly. The walls were freshly painted, and the old, dusty blackboard had been replaced with a modern whiteboard. The plaque dedicated to Henry Matthews was mounted on the wall near the door. It read, "In memory of Henry Matthews, who was lost but never forgotten. May his story inspire kindness and courage in us all." Standing in the room, we felt a sense of peace. It was a stark contrast to the oppressive, haunted feeling from before. We knew that Henry's spirit had been laid to rest, but the experience had left an indelible mark on us. "Do you think Henry's really at peace now?" Mia asked, her voice soft and reflective. "I hope so," I replied, placing a hand on the plaque. "We did everything we could to honor him. His story will help others, and that's the best we can do." Jason nodded, his usual bravado replaced with a thoughtful expression. "It's weird, you know, how one day can change everything. We started off just looking for a thrill, and now we've actually made a difference." Emma smiled, though her eyes were still tinged with the sadness of the memories we had uncovered. "We should always remember this, not just Henry, but the importance of standing up for what's right. We owe it to him and to ourselves." As we left the classroom, a soft breeze seemed to follow us, almost as if Henry was thanking us one last time. We walked through the now quiet hallways, feeling a sense of closure. That night, I dreamt of the cornfield again. But this time, the children were laughing and playing, no longer trapped in an endless game of hide and seek. Henry was there too, smiling at me, his eyes filled with gratitude. I woke up feeling lighter, the weight of the past finally lifted. Our lives slowly returned to normal, but the experience had changed us all. We were more aware of the people around us, more sensitive to the struggles others might be facing. We became advocates for anti-bullying campaigns at our school, determined to prevent another tragedy like Henry's. Years passed, and we eventually graduated and went our separate ways. But the bond we formed during that harrowing night remained strong. Every year, on the anniversary of Henry's death, we would gather in that classroom to honor his memory, to remind ourselves of the lessons we learned, and to renew our commitment to kindness and empathy. Henry Matthews' story, once a ghostly whisper in a locked room, had become a beacon of hope and change. The classroom was no longer a place of dread, but a symbol of redemption and the power of truth. And for us, it was a constant reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way to find the light. The time loop. The last day of school was supposed to be a celebration, a carefree day marking the beginning of summer. Instead, it became my personal nightmare. I woke up to the blaring sound of my alarm, the same obnoxious beeping I'd heard every morning for the past 4 years. But today felt different. It was an unsettling feeling, a creeping dread that I couldn't shake off. I got dressed and headed to school, trying to ignore the unease settling in my stomach. The day proceeded like any other last day, teachers trying to maintain order, while students buzzed with excitement. But something was off. I noticed that my classmates were behaving strangely. Their smiles were too wide, their laughter too forced. It was as if they were actors in a play, putting on a performance for an audience only they could see. By lunchtime, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As I walked down the hallway, the fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows on the decaying walls. The posters on the bulletin board seemed to whisper as I passed, the words morphing into sinister messages. Help US, you're trapped, break the curse. I tried to shake off the sense of paranoia, convincing myself it was just end-of-year stress. But then, the bell rang, signaling the end of the day. I gathered my things and headed home, relieved to put this unsettling day behind me. But when I woke up the next morning, it was the last day of school all over again. The same alarm, the same dread, the same strange behavior from my classmates. Only this time, everything was slightly worse. The school's walls were peeling, revealing dark, mouldy patches underneath. The air was thick with an oppressive sense of decay. My classmates' smiles were now twisted, their eyes vacant and hollow. Whispers followed me everywhere I went, growing louder and more urgent. Desperation clawed at my mind as I realized I was trapped in a time loop, reliving the last day of school over and over again. Each iteration became more disturbing, more horrifying. On the third day, I stumbled upon a forgotten section of the school library. There, hidden among the dusty shelves, was an old newspaper clipping detailing a tragic event that had occurred years ago, a fire that claimed the lives of several students and a teacher on the last day of school. My heart pounded as I read the article. The names of the victims were familiar. They were the names of my classmates, the ones behaving so bizarrely. The teacher, Mr. Thompson, was my homeroom teacher. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was reliving the day they died, caught in a loop because of their unresolved spirits. Determined to break the cycle, I began to piece together the events leading up to the fire. I spent each repeated day gathering clues, talking to the ghostly apparitions of my classmates, trying to understand their cryptic messages. They spoke of betrayal, of a hidden truth buried beneath the ashes. On the fifth day, I finally uncovered the truth. The fire had not been an accident. It was deliberately set by Mr. Thompson in a fit of rage after discovering he was being fired. The students had been locked inside, unable to escape the inferno. I knew what I had to do. Armed with this knowledge, I confronted Mr. Thompson on the sixth iteration. His ghostly form flickered and wavered as I accused him of his crimes. The rage in his eyes was terrifying, but I stood my ground, demanding he confess and release the souls of the students. The school shook violently as Mr. Thompson's spirit howled in fury, but then, with a final scream, he vanished. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the school returned to its normal state. My classmates, now free, thanked me with sad smiles before fading away, their spirits finally at peace. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my alarm, feeling a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in days. The nightmare was over. The last day of school had finally come to an end, and with it, the haunting presence of the past. As I walked to school for the final time, I knew I would never forget the lesson I had learned. Sometimes, the past refuses to stay buried, and it's up to the living to uncover the truth and set things right. The sun shone brightly as I walked to school, a stark contrast to the oppressive gloom that had pervaded the past few days. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt hopeful. The burden of the haunting was lifted, and my heart was lighter. As I approached the school, I couldn't help but notice how normal everything seemed. The walls were clean, the lights bright, and my classmates behaved like their usual selves, unaware of the horrors that had transpired. In homeroom, Mr. Thompson's desk was empty. A substitute teacher took his place, informing us that Mr. Thompson had resigned suddenly. The class murmured, speculating on his abrupt departure, but I knew the truth. His malevolent spirit had been banished, and the curse was broken. I focused on my day, eager to leave the unsettling memories behind. During lunch, I shared what I had learned with Emma, Jason, and Mia, my closest friends who had stuck by me through the bizarre ordeal. They listened intently, their faces pale, as I recounted the details of the tragic fire and Mr. Thompson's rage-fueled actions. They were shocked but supportive, their presence a comforting reminder that I wasn't alone. "Do you think it's really over?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," I replied, though a part of me remained cautious. "The spirits are at peace now, and Mr. Thompson's gone. We did everything we could." Jason nodded. "Still, it's hard to believe something so horrible happened here. It's like the school has a completely different history now." "It does," Mia said quietly, "but we can make sure nothing like that ever happens again." The final bell rang, marking the true end of the school year. As we walked out of the building, I felt a sense of closure. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the school grounds. I took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill my lungs. It was a new beginning, not just for me, but for the school as well. That night, I sat at my desk, reflecting on everything that had happened. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at my door. My mom walked in, carrying a small, dusty box. "I found this in the attic," she said, setting it down in front of me. "It looks like it belonged to your great-grandfather. I thought you might find it interesting." Curiosity piqued. I opened the box to find an assortment of old photographs, letters, and trinkets. Among them was a journal, its leather cover worn and fragile. I carefully opened it, reading the first few pages. It detailed my great-grandfather's experiences as a teacher in the same school I attended. As I read through the journal, I found an entry that caught my eye. It described a student named Henry Matthews, a bright but troubled boy who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. My heart raced as I realized my great-grandfather had been one of the few who believed Henry's disappearance was no accident. He had suspected foul play, but could never prove it. The journal entries mirrored the events I had experienced, detailing strange occurrences and ghostly sightings that plagued the school after Henry's disappearance. My great-grandfather had tried to uncover the truth, but was met with resistance and fear from the school administration. His journal ended abruptly, leaving many questions unanswered. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. The haunting had deeper roots than I had imagined, stretching back through my own family history. It seemed that the school's dark past had always been intertwined with my fate. Determined to honor both Henry and my great-grandfather, I decided to continue their legacy. I would research further, uncovering any remaining secrets and ensuring that the school remained a place of safety and learning, free from the shadows of its past. I shared my findings with Emma, Jason, and Mia, and together, we vowed to preserve the truth and protect the future. The last day of school had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As I looked out at the moonlit night, I felt a sense of purpose. The horrors we had faced would not be forgotten, but neither would they define us. We had emerged stronger, united by our shared experiences, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.